I'm so glad you could all join us this morning. At the Chamber, we continue to fulfill our mission to educate, facilitate, convene, advocate, but now virtually. We've been virtual since mid-March, and we are proud that the Not-for-Profit Conference is our first virtual conference, as Kay mentioned. I'm also tremendously grateful for all of the hard work that has gone on into preparing this conference by the Not-for-Profit Board Chair, Paul Muir of the Red Mill Inn, and his vice chairs, Jay Weissman of Legacy Financial Group and Sally Glick of Sobel & Co. LLC, which happens to be our platinum sponsor this year. I'm also grateful for the tireless work of our incredible Chamber team, in particular Ms. Kaylee Hilling, who you just heard from, who is behind the controls this morning, and who many of you have heard from this past month. And also Colette Moran, our Director of Marketing, who has put together a fabulous PDF document to commemorate the event today, with agenda and description of our award winners and our speakers. She's also put together a website for this program, so please feel free to visit it either during the program or afterwards to learn more about our honorees and our speakers. I do encourage you to download the PDF document, and as I mentioned, there are a number of links within it as well. I would like to thank our sponsor, as I mentioned, Sobel & Co., PPAC Gladstone Bank also, who's dedicated to the success of nonprofits and who has assisted many during this crisis to secure government grants and loans. Also, Dennis Miller and Associates LLC, who besides being a consulting business, has just launched a suite of webinars for the nonprofit community. And of course, Sobel & Co., who is dedicated to you, the nonprofit community. I don't have to tell you, but Morris County is truly an extraordinary place. This is in large part because of our not-for-profit sector. The Chamber of Commerce has 725 members, and of those, 20% are from the not-for-profit community. The Chamber has a proud history of including and supporting the not-for-profit sector, and we are glad to put this conference on annually. The roundtable, led by Paul Muir, continues to meet monthly, and the not-for-profit Mastermind continues to meet weekly. It has been indispensable during this challenging time, allowing those who serve nonprofits or work for nonprofits to come together to share and learn best practices. I would also like to thank you, our Chamber community, for your adaptability during this time, and of course your resilience. With everything that is going on, we know that we are now more interdependent than ever. The Chamber is a membership organization, which means our mission is to serve you. Our mission is your success. Our mission is to ensure that you have the best knowledge to succeed in achieving your mission. We know that we need you, the not-for-profit community of which the Chamber is a part, now more than ever, to help us get us through this crisis, which unfortunately may take a little bit longer than we had hoped. That's why this year's topic is of vital importance: doing more with more. It's a wonderful way to describe what our speakers have practiced in their organizations and what they will be discussing with us today that has improved their delivery of service, has increased their revenue, has enabled them as an organization to have an even greater positive impact to the community and those they serve. So thank you for joining us today. Thank you to our sponsors for making this possible, and congratulations to our honorees. So now I'd like to turn it over to Sally Glick, our Chief Growth Strategist for Sobel & Co. Sally?
Thank you, Megan. About an ambitious event, having a conference with so many moving parts. I'm impressed. We've been sponsoring for years. It was a little bit easier to stand up at the podium and address everyone personally. But at the same time, I'm delighted that the Chamber, being the committed group that it is, has put this together to serve the nonprofit community, and we're glad to be a part of it yet again. What's, I think, unique about Sobel, we are a CPA firm that is accounting, tax, and advisory services. But what's unique is that about 15 to 20% of our clientele is the nonprofit community. And many years ago, we had all seen the Simon Sinek YouTube on the why. And many of you have either read that book or seen him yourself. And we went around the room in our office and said, why do you do what you do? Let's look at what Simon Sinek talks about in terms of passion. And when we got to our nonprofit practice group and said, why do you do what you do? They said, in 2 seconds, it didn't take any time at all, we are so glad and happy to be able to help others. It makes us feel good to help others who do good. And where I've been with other firms who talk about the nonprofit work being a great opportunity to fill the summer months or to keep staff busy, at our firm, it had nothing to do with that. It had to do with a passion for the community we serve. And so that's why it's such a pleasure to be a part of Sobelco and to know the strong backing they have for the Morris County Chamber and the commitment we've made to this nonprofit committee, as well as to the nonprofit community. So thank you, Megan, for the opportunity to say a few words and introduce Sobelco to our audience, and to say thank you again for giving me the honor of being up in front, talking away, which is something I love to do year after year after year. It's been just a great collaboration. Staying with the theme, we can't think of a better partner to have.
So, once again, everybody, thank you for joining us, and I have the pleasure of introducing our keynote speaker. Once we established the theme of this year's conference of doing more with more and looking to maximize the community impact through collaboration, there really was no better choice than our keynote speaker, Hans Decker. So Hans Decker has served as president of the Community Foundation of New Jersey since 2003. The foundation has $525 million in charitable assets. During Mr. Decker's tenure, the foundation's donor and legacy funds have made over $400 million in grants to charitable causes in our communities. The key element of the Community Foundation's mission is to play a leadership role on the critical issues facing New Jersey and its communities. It has recently focused on the New Jersey Pandemic Relief Fund, juvenile justice reform, and fresh food and food desserts. Mr. Decker is a past chair of the Council of New Jersey Grantmakers and a trustee of the Hyde and Watson, Milano, and the Old Foundations. So Hans will share his experience in collaboration and how best to achieve success. So join me in welcoming Hans Decker. I'll turn it over to you, Hans.
I hear the applause. It's just pouring out of the computer. Thanks, Paul. Thanks, everybody. Thrilled to be here. We've been a part of the Morris Chamber for a number of years, and are very conscious of their commitment to the nonprofit community, which is not true of all chambers. And so they're a wonderful asset for our community. I thought I'd just spend 1 minute before I got into the meat of the matter, just talking a little bit about the Community Foundation for folks that don't know us. There are 500 or 600 community foundations around the country. We're the Community Foundation of New Jersey. We were started in 1979. And as Paul said, we have about $525 million in assets. Those are divided into roughly 4 categories. So we have assets where people have left us money over the years usually to benefit an institution or a cause in their community. Our most recent example is we're getting a large bequest from Philip Roth, the Newark-born author, to benefit the Newark Library. And so from those assets, we give money away. We have a dedicated pot of money for Morris County where our board and committees give that money away. And then we have money at our board level, and then we have money for different regions of the state. The second kind of function of the Community Foundation is we have a number of scholarships, mostly for kids in high school. And we award about $1.2 million a year in scholarships. People are getting more creative about scholarships as the years go by. And so we have some for kids in high school. We have some for summer certifications, and it's a very robust area of charitable giving. The third piece and the largest piece are what in the business are called donor advised funds, which are families and companies in lieu of creating their own foundation, create a fund at the Community Foundation, and from that fund they do their charitable giving. Of the money we gave away last year, we gave away probably $60 million last year. Just to give you the scale, $55 million come from donor advised funds. So it's a very robust part of the Community Foundation. Our donor advised funds will make somewhere near 6,000 grants this year. And COVID is a really good example of the power of donor advised funds, because our giving has doubled over last year as people have tried to help our communities respond to the pandemic. And then the fourth piece of the Community Foundation is we host charitable efforts. Locally, we host the Morristown Festival of Books. We host Impact Garden State, which is a wonderful collection of now almost 400 women who each give of their own resources and then make collective gifts to nonprofits in our community. And then, as Paul mentioned, we've been honored to partner with First Lady Tammy Murphy to host the New Jersey Pandemic Relief Fund. And our state and some friends from outside the state have been wonderfully generous. We've raised almost $37 million now to help our communities respond to the challenges. We've given out about 9 or 10 million of that so far, mostly for food security issues and healthcare. And they're starting a next phase where we start to think about how do we help our communities and our nonprofits recover from the pandemic. So very quickly, that's the Community Foundation. As I think everybody knows, the topic today for the talk is collaboration. I'm gonna try to do some very advanced things with my with Zoom today, and that is called share your screen. I'm the first person to know you can do that, but I'm gonna try it anyway. So, and I promise this is the only page where I'm gonna read, but I wanted everybody to see this quote. So for those of you that have been in the nonprofit sector or in the foundation world, as you know, we love verbiage. And every couple of years, some new phrases come to the fore and they become very popular. Collaboration is one of those. It doesn't mean that they don't have import and meaning, but sometimes I think we in the sector sort of beat the meaning out of words. And so what I have here is a quote from a book that came out way back in 2000 that I thought I've always loved, which is, the book's title is A Plea for Plain Speaking. And he went through and basically kind of made fun of foundations for the language they use. And the quote you see here is an actual excerpt from a request for proposal from a national foundation. And I'll read it just because I've always thought it was very funny. Comprehensive community building naturally lends itself to a return on investment rationale that can be modeled, drawing from existing practice. A factor constraining the flow of resources to CCIs is that funders must often resort to targeting or categorical requirements in grant making to ensure accountability. And Tony goes out to point out that all of these buzzwords, return on investment, modeling, constraints, resources, targeting, accountability, are mostly from other fields: finance, economics, social sciences, management theory, and military strategy. And then he closes with, each word carries so much professional freight that the reader ends up exhausted from hauling the load. And so I always have loved that because it just emphasizes sort of the tortured use of language, which occasionally I think means we're talking past each other. Some of my favorite buzzwords, I'm gonna stop sharing I think now. Some of my favorite buzzwords over the years have been innovation. So it's hard to see a request for proposals or a grant application that doesn't mention innovation. It mentions it to a point where it's very challenging, I think, to understand what people are talking about. I'll hear nonprofits all the time say, I have a really great program that's worked for 20 years. It's tried and true. Is that innovative? And I occasionally have to say, I don't think so, because it's not brand new. But so that's one of my favorite buzzwords. Collective impact is a new one. You'll hear a lot. It's related to collaboration. Our talk, which is what our talk is about today. Alignment is another very popular one. In the corporate community, you'll hear a lot of shared value. And you know, I have a vague sense, you know, of what folks mean when they use these words. But I'm not sure that my definition is always the user's definition, and I think vice versa. You know, I've been in the grant making world for a lot, and I learned over the years that if we say to a nonprofit, oh, that's an interesting idea, why don't you tell us more about it? What they hear is, I'm gonna get a grant. And what we hear is, we're vaguely interested, maybe we'll give you a grant. And it's just an example of how sometimes we talk past each other. Today, the word we're talking about is collaboration. I do think frequently we have different meanings about collaboration. And we're going to run through a couple of quiz items or survey items to see if we can get a sense of who the audience is today and what folks really think collaboration means. So, Kay, if you would put up our first quiz survey. So we have about a fifth of the audience are executive directors, a fifth are from our fine development community. We have a good number of trustees and board chairs, and then a very popular category, other staff. All right,
Okay.
we have two questions coming up about sort of how people think about collaboration. So Kay, will you launch the next question?
Sure. Question number 2. And you see the results?
I can. So
Wonderful.
number 1 with the bullet is shared projects with a nonprofit where the money is commingled. The one that got 0 answers, which I think is interesting, is merger with a nonprofit due to a weak financial situation of one of the nonprofits. I would actually tell you in the field, I think, and I'm going to give away a punchline of my talk, but is most folks think about collaboration when one of the partners is in a weak situation. I think I think that's the first thing, at least on my side of the table, that people think about, is who can we get them to collaborate to sort of lift them up. And I do also think a lot of the merger with a nonprofit to increase the impact of both only got 12% of the answers. And I would tell you that a lot of people think of that as an important part of collaboration, which we'll talk about in a second.
Okay.
So should I take this down here, Kay?
Yeah, I'm going to hit stop share results, and then you can click out of you can X out of the box.
Got it. So I think everybody knows that basically in general, if you're sitting around a table with other foundations, that you'll hear folks say there's not enough collaboration in our sector. It's a lament that I hear a lot. I have this quote there's a wonderful piece that I'll talk about later in the Stanford Innovation Journal, and the author was Art Taylor, and he said, historically, nonprofits have used collaboration to keep sinking organizations afloat. And I do think in the field, despite our poll results, that's what people often think about. What I think that funders are saying when they use the word collaboration is that we need more scale, that we need more impact from our nonprofit sector. That's why you see it on grant application after grant application. New Jersey especially, I think, we have arrayed our nonprofit community around our towns, right? And so most of us serve a relatively small geographic area in our state. And just as we have lots of towns and lots of municipalities, we have relatively lots of nonprofits. Doug Schoenberg's on the call, I see, from the Center for Nonprofits. If you take a look every year, they do a survey of the nonprofit sector in the state. The last one used 2018 data. We have 34,000 nonprofits in New Jersey. We have one nonprofit for every 264 New Jerseyans. We rank in the top 10 of states in number of nonprofits per capita. And so the other thing that I thought was interesting, I'm going to try to share my screen again here, is that the center also, is part of this survey that they do, asks nonprofits, do they foresee an increase in demand for their services? And let me just share my screen here. And this is the data 2019 to 2018. 71% of nonprofits thought they would see an increase in their demand for services. 65 thought they would serve more people. 75% thought that in 2020 there would be more demand for their services. If we go down, this is a past survey that they did, same numbers in 2016, same numbers in 2017, same numbers in 2015. And I think it's important to reflect on these results because, you know, in 2019, pre-COVID, we were in the midst of a 10-year economic growth cycle. You know, philanthropy had grown year over year, basically. And yet we, as a sector, are only seeing increasing demand. We're not seeing reducing demand. And sometimes, you know, in the dark of the night, I say to myself, why can't we drive demand down? Why aren't we getting better as a sector? And I don't have an answer for that, but I think in the context of our collaboration conversation, we have to reflect about why when the economy is strong, there's more wealth, our nonprofit sector can see such an increase in demand. And I think one thing to reflect on is that at least in the philanthropic sector, folks are saying, have we designed the system that we need to drive down challenges in our community? Is this the best model? So when I hear folks talking about collaboration, what I really hear them talking about is can we make a better mousetrap? Can we deliver services in a way that really reduces demand? And that's a long conversation, but that's what I hear when people are talking about collaboration. So another quote from Art Taylor from this Stanford piece: nonprofits need cost-effective ways to conduct numerous rapid experiments concurrently if they're going to uncover new and better solutions. And I think a lot of us are pedaling so hard to keep the lights on in our organizations. You know, our budgets are tight, and it reduces our capacity to think about how we can, and I'm going to use the word innovative, even though I just made fun of it at the beginning. I think we have to talk about how we can innovate to create new ways to respond to solutions. You know, in the Pandemic Relief Fund, one of the conversations we have is how do we get at the structural sort of, some people say gaps, now everyone says chasms that were exposed by COVID, right? You know, sort of these, we all knew we had these systemic flaws, but poor healthcare in urban communities, disproportionate health impacts in Black and brown communities. And, you know, COVID comes along and there they are, right? I mean, they're just right immediately. You see the disproportionate impact on African Americans. You see a nonprofit sector. Not many of us have the resources to put money away for a rainy day. And so nonprofits are struggling. We built revenue models on human events, galas, you know, one-on-one fundraising, all of those are struggling. And when you sit in the COVID relief fund and you say, wow, we've raised $37 million, that's a lot of money. And then you look at the depth of needs that are emerging in the nonprofit community and you realize it's a drop in the bucket, that there is no way. I mean, one of the first emails I got during COVID, a wonderful social service organization that said, we estimate our financial losses to be $5 million. Can you help us? And I'm sitting there thinking, we'd be lucky to get you $50,000. That isn't going to solve, you know, that's not even, that's 1% of your challenge. Like, the scale of this is beyond philanthropy. And I think COVID, among other things, forces us to think about other ways to capitalize our institutions and, to get to the point of today's speech, to collaborate with each other more. And I think everyone was right to test it, right? Where we're independent organizations and we test working on things together. But we also need to start thinking about, are there ways to deliver more scale, more economies of scale in our institutions? et cetera. One of the ways to do that, and this is one of the things we're doing in the Pandemic Relief Fund, is to think about, and I know a lot of folks do this naturally, but to think about how do we leverage public resources. That's where the money is, right? I mean, there's literally billions of dollars flowing to New Jersey from the federal government. Some cynics might say it's all money we just printed out of thin air, but it is real billions of dollars. And how can we, as the nonprofit community, collaborate with that money? Because if we can use a little bit of philanthropic and nonprofit money to make the public spending wiser, then we all benefit. There's a good example from a program from Baltimore that we're looking at, which is there's money, federal money that flowed into the community for contact tracing and testing. But because it's federal money, it has real limitations on what it can be spent on. And so the philanthropic community put money in to allow the folks that are the employees for the contact tracing to get a community health worker certification, so that they now, one, their own economic opportunities improved, but two, we now have a permanent resource around healthcare in the community that we can leverage in other ways. And so I heard Darren Walker from the Ford Foundation speak about 9 months ago, and he was encouraging the philanthropic sector to devote more and more resources to advocacy, to changing public policy, to leveraging our dollars to improve the flow of public resources to the nonprofit community, to make the kind of policy changes we need to make. We've been advocating, and I don't know if we're going to have any luck in this current budget environment, for a charitable deduction on the state income tax for gifts to New Jersey nonprofits. To me, it's a really good example of how to invest some money, collaborate. In this case, we're collaborating with the Center for Nonprofits, other foundations in the state, so that we can leverage a little bit of money so that all of us benefit. Now, whether we can get that done in this budget environment is an open question. But to me, it's a good example of collaboration across the sector and really reaching for something that will help all of our institutions have more resources. And then the third sort of vector that I think you'll be hearing a lot about with collaboration is in this racial equity conversation. How are people going to think about collaboration? And what a lot of nonprofit or foundation institutions are talking about is how do we use resources to build capacity in Black and brown communities? How do we use resources to build racial equity? And I think what folks are gonna start asking nonprofits are, what are you doing? Who are you partnering with? Who are you collaborating with to build capacities in the communities that we serve, rather than just deliver services? What are we doing to leave a legacy, if you will, of more capacity in those communities? You know, the fact is, if you look at the nonprofits that the Community Foundation supports, the vast majority of them are quote unquote white-led organizations. The majority of the board is white. The executive leadership is by and large white. And I think there's gonna be a lot of focus in the foundation community about how do we diversify not only who we give money to, but in our case, how we invest our money, what our own board looks like, what our own team looks like. How do we, I've been using those Stephen Covey boxes, if folks remember from college. You know, there's important and urgent, urgent, not important, and urgent, et cetera. And I think the racial equity conversation is gonna go from important, but maybe people didn't think it was the most urgent thing to work on, into important and urgent. It's gonna be in the forefront of everybody's focus for, I hope, for the foreseeable future. And then I'm going to share my screen here as I close out a little bit. And I just wanted to give these lessons. Let's see here. So again, from this Art Taylor speech in the Stanford Social Innovation Review, which was published in May of 17, he had 9 lessons for collaboration. The first is build trust. You You know, sometimes I joke when people talk about collaboration, what we really mean is you do it, is I'm getting you to do what I want you to do, right? I've got a vision and I'm trying to talk you into supporting my vision. And his point is real collaboration is where we sort of meet each other halfway. My objectives and your objectives get merged and massaged together so that we have a shared vision. Second, have a vision. And what Art means in this piece is all of us, nonprofits, should have a sort of 7 to 10 year vision of who we are and the role we are playing in the community and the niche we're trying to fill. And if we are good at articulating what that role is, I think it helps us look past our immediate needs. You know, to be honest with you, there's a scenario where there aren't going to be donor advised funds in 10 years. And so at the Community Foundation, we're asking ourselves, what value can we add in the community if we're not providing donor advised funds? Because I mentioned at the beginning, the majority of our resources are donor advised funds. That's the majority of the money that passes through us into the community. And as those get more competitive and there's some regulatory pressure, maybe those are going to look different than they look now. And how can we prepare for that future? So, and who, to our point, can we collaborate with? And we have had conversations over the years with other institutions about collaboration, and in some scenarios about how to merge. And those are always hard, especially if you can't crystallize sort of who you want to be in 10 years. His third point, seek to assure the success of your collaboration, seems self-explanatory. His fourth, and I think this is hard for all of us to do, but is to really take stock in what your strengths and weaknesses are, what the external and internal threats you have, and how can I collaborate in a way that addresses the weaknesses or magnifies my strengths. Art would argue for starting small, doing small things with each other, fail fast, build rigorous feedback loops, take a portfolio approach so that we're trying multiple different types of collaboration with multiple partners so that if a couple fail, as a portfolio we succeed. I think this speaks to the racial equity point, which is to really consider non-traditional partners. You know, I think some of the traditional rules in grant making are going to shift. You know, for years you'll see you have to have 3 years of audited financials. You have to have an operating budget over X. And I think folks are going to start to recognize that that cuts out big segments of our community from participating in the work. And then lastly, and probably most importantly to all of us, is how do you keep donors apprised of your collaborations? And I would even go farther than this. How do you engage folks in that work? I know in the philanthropic sector, some of the easiest money to get, frankly, is when when institutions are talking about, we want to merge, we want to collaborate, we want to scale up. And I know by and large foundations are excited to invest in that. So I'll close here, okay? And I'll follow your direction on where we head next, if we're going to take questions or if I've burned through all my time. Thanks.
Definitely did not burn through all your time. I'm sorry, Kate, I was jumping in.
You're good, Wendy. Thank you. Since you're handling Q&A, it makes sense.
Yes, and honestly, this was terrific for me to hear because you made me think of collaboration in ways that I haven't before. Excuse me. One in particular was merges. You know, I wouldn't necessarily have thought of that as a collaborative effort, but of course it's a collaborative effort, right? I look at the Mental Health Association, the Morris and Essex, and when they went through that big lift of joining forces, you know, and I think of, and what they did was, you know, they did that because of their mission and because of what was going on in the insurance world, and how can we still serve our clients the best we can, and the best way to do that was to merge the two. So thank you for that, because that really made me think of collaboration in a different way. Couple other things you said, I just wanted to, you know, how can we innovate? You know, I know you said you kind of put the word down at the beginning, but I really think it's a good word, and
it is a good word,
you know, to help solve our issues. And that one, and the scale of this is beyond philanthropy, right? So you're absolutely right. It's beyond it now. We have to think of new ways to partner with, I love the one point about think about non-traditional partners. You know, I thought that was excellent. So we do have some questions, and I'm going to keep an eye on the chat too as they come in. Denise Lanza from the Morris Parks, who
Hi, Denise.
I'm Parks near and dear to my heart. So she had the same thought that I did, where she thinks of a merger as more of a permanent, solution, not necessarily a collaboration. So maybe you could just expand on your thoughts on that, because I actually touched on it as well.
Yeah, I mean, Denise is right. I mean, I think it's a spectrum. The point I think I was trying to get at is when foundations or funders use collaboration, I do think they're thinking big. They're trying to say, as I said in the talk, how can we get to greater scale? How can we reach more people? How can we drive down the demand for services? I think they're thinking sector-wise. And it's a little tired now, but this sense that we have too many nonprofits, this sounds mean, I don't mean it to, but it's almost too many mouths to feed. I'm really worried about I think it's very likely that whether we like it or not, there's going to be a lot of restructuring in the nonprofit community coming out of COVID. I mean,
and there could be
financial losses are huge. Go ahead, sorry.
There could be some silver linings to that, right? I mean, I look at the economies of scale, like you were talking about. We have to look at that. It's like a shared service concept, right? They can be very effective if they're run well, right? So that's the key, right? Everybody thinks, oh yeah, it's great, let's outsource, or oh, let's do this, but unless it's executed. And I like that other point that was made, fail fast. So we don't fail fast enough sometimes, right? Like just fail, it's okay, learn from it, get back up, right? And move on to, how can we do it better, kind of thing. All right, so we have Jillian Pereira. It's basically a comment. She said she's been encouraged by the surge of collaboration as a result of the COVID crisis. And I think that just goes back to, with any crisis, there can be great change and it can be positive, right?
Agreed, yeah. I think sometimes I use this phrase, we have to bottle the urgency.
Yeah.
I don't know if folks saw this, but
bottle the baloney. No.
Like foundations right after COVID struck said, oh, we're just going to fund operating support. We're going to reduce the time we take to review applications. We're going to do multi-year funding, which are things that the nonprofit community has been crying out for 20 years. And I thought it was interesting that all of a sudden COVID comes along and we say to ourselves, oh, those practices that we thought were so important aren't that important anymore. So I think if we can sustain the urgency to look at all of our practices in a new way, that'll lead to a better sector.
Agreed. So we have a couple of questions from Eileen Heltzer from Planned Parenthood of Northern, Central, and Southern New Jersey. She's asking if changes in government policies and business investments can lift people out of poverty, home ownership, paid sick time, etc. What about changes for cultural institutions, for example, theater, dance, music, and museums?
Yeah. I'm not saying anything anybody doesn't know on this call. Of the sectors that people should be most worried about, it would be the arts. And
that's been going on since before COVID, right?
Yeah. And then this is just a very I thought, when NJPAC, which is a very well endowed and supported institution, when they're laying off the number of people that they are, as you guys know, a big chunk of the revenue is built on people coming to performances. And so I don't have, Eileen, really great answers about what the arts look like. I mean, I'd love if folks have ideas. What we're trying to figure out in the pandemic relief is how can we take a little bit of money to leverage the sector? Because we don't have enough money to just fill the holes that have been created at every institution.
Yeah.
You know, I hear and the State Council of the Arts is going to have the same issue. And, you know, I think we're struggling, frankly, to come up with ideas that can lift the sector. And maybe to the point of this talk today, or this conference today, how can we encourage more collaboration and maybe even mergers so that folks can, the work they do in their community can survive, even if it's not in the current wrapper that it's in.
Yeah, and I look at things, you know, like the Morris Park System and MPAC, you know, collaborated. I don't think it's happened yet. I think it might be coming up, but on an outdoor concert where, you know, they can fit so many cars, you know, on a field. And, you know, to me, that's thinking out of the box, right? That's like, how can we keep people engaged and interested? And that's what we're going to have to do, right? Be creative and innovative. All righty, let's see. So Mark Valley, the philanthropic community can provide financial incentives for hesitant nonprofits to merge through two vehicles. First, through existing philanthropy and direct difficult conversations. Second, creating an incentive funding pool to facilitate mergers.
Amen, Mark.
Yes.
Morris County at one point, I've been around so long that there used to be a pot of money at Morris County for mergers. My experience, I agree completely with Mark about the resources. To me, the stumbling block on mergers, and maybe sometimes even collaboration, has surprised me over the years that it's less about the staff or the team. And I've experienced more issues at the board level, that the boards are more reluctant to sort of give up the brand and the history and this is a conversation I have with trustees all the time. You know, they should be stewards not only of the organization that they're on the board of, but of the community at large. And thinking about what role does our institution play in the community, and how can what's the best way to deliver the work.
Right.
I have found boards to be harder to navigate sometimes than the staff. You know, I always say about when we talk about mergers, or, you know, there's a risk factor in it, right? I have a mortgage, I have 2 kids in college, I have very little interest in losing my job. And so anything that seems to threaten my financial stability, I'm scared of. And I think we've seen this, Wendy, in getting shared services at the community level. You have to look for moments when folks are retiring, when there's natural moments of transition. And then we as a community have to say, now's a moment where we can sort of invest in a new way of doing things.
Right. Excellent point. And what we're talking about ties into a question that Tom Werder had from Morris Arts. He says, I think many nonprofits are hesitant to discuss our failures with our funders.
Yep.
What can foundations do to encourage fast failure?
Yeah, I have an answer to get. So I think this gets to, as everybody knows, over the last 30 years, foundations have shifted to this. What are the outcomes? You know, they're project-based funders. Show me the number of widgets that I got for my grant. Show me I want to count the number of kids that my money served. I don't want to pay for the overhead. I don't want to pay for the lights to be on. And that, to me, that's the conversation we have to shift. Because what we should be doing is be in partnership to try new things, and the nonprofit is a partner. And if the early indications that the first approach we use for this project aren't going to work, we should be able to have folks come back and say, we've got to change course. And there shouldn't be any quote unquote punishment for that. And I think on both sides of the ledger, I heard, every time I give a talk, I like to use my prom metaphor. And so I'm thrilled that it's come up. But I always joke that if you think about grant writing like going to prom, you do not FedEx your invitation to your prom date to them the night before prom. And if by chance they did go to prom with you, you don't wait a year to send a report about how prom went, right? You try to stay in conversation with people throughout the year. And I think we've created this reporting system. I do this. I wonder if you guys do it. I say, oh, there's a report to the Dodge Foundation. It's due May 15th. I'll put it on my calendar for May 7th to get working on it. And then I'll FedEx it to them the night before it's due. And what we have to do is encourage a year-long, in case it's a time-spanned conversation about what's working and not working, and to Tom's point, what we're failing at, so that we can redirect resources in a partnership. It's not the foundation sitting behind the veil judging everybody. It's a real partnership. That's hard to do. But I do think this shift that you saw from the foundation community after COVID is a step in that direction.
Right. And you touched on something that made me think about the receivers of the grant applications, right? How much would they love not getting inundated the day before the grant is due, which is what tends to happen, right? So it's almost like if you do it early, you're going to get a little more attention, a little more special attention, where, there's 500 that come through versus, 10 or early. So that's good.
I sometimes say, like, getting a grant is a little bit like getting into college, right? There are a lot of A- students.
There's a process, yeah.
So
Yeah.
you have to figure out how to stand out.
Yeah, good, very good point. So Alan Zakin has a question. Corporations in recent years have focused primarily on philanthropy that achieves their core mission and less on general support for the communities in which they operate. Do you see this paradigm changing post-COVID as community need is more urgent?
I don't know. I suspect not, right? The shift that Alan's exactly right. Over the last 30 years, we've seen this shift from community-based philanthropy to what I would call branded philanthropy, right? And foundations do this and corporations do it. We're all about housing. We're all about Habitat for Humanity. We're about, kids before 6. We're about, everyone has a theme. And Paul's on the call and he can speak to his experience, but folks are sort of they're internally trying to justify the philanthropic. It's the same dynamic. They want to justify the money that's being invested in philanthropy. And so they want to count widgets too. They want to go back and say, look what we did with our money. And community-based philanthropy, for better or for worse, the way it evolved in the late 20th century was less focused on counting widgets and more saying, I'm old enough that you remember the phrase, I gave it the office. You contributed to the United Way. Yep. You went to a core of good nonprofits in the community, 20 or 30 folks, and you didn't ask a bunch of questions about what happened after that. Right. And now everybody's asking questions because they want to justify the investment that they've made. They want to, as I said, count widgets. So I don't know if that dynamic's going to change. What I think nonprofits can do is, and this is hard to do, and I say it and people shake their head when I say it, but we can fight back about everybody trying to fund into specific silos of your organization. So, when people say we have to be really good at articulating what at an organizational level we achieve, and then invite people to invest in that organizational impact. But once you start saying, oh, okay, you don't have to pay for overhead, I'll just let you do the child care program, right? And the child care is just a part of a more comprehensive program you have. It's important to be able to articulate at an organizational level what your impact is. And not all of us, I think we've all gotten into the habit of also just talking about what specific programs do. I've got the transitional housing program, I've got the child care program. And then at the organizational level, this is where our overhead, I hate the word overhead, right? And when there are people smarter than me on this call, so they could correct me on this, but overhead came from the federal funding, where there was an allocation for federal funding for quote unquote overhead. And so people started putting into their budgets overhead so they could get an NIH grant. Now it is seeped into everything we do. So I wouldn't, if I were a nonprofit, unless I'm forced to, articulate what my overhead is, because all of the overhead is delivering the childcare. It's delivering the transitional housing. It's not overhead. And I think, you know, and you'll see it a lot at the university level where they have a carve out for overhead and everyone pushes back on it. And it's this silly little cycle.
Excellent. Well, this has been fabulous. I've really taken away some great nuggets, but we have to wrap this up. So do you have any final words of wisdom or little nuggets, a nugget you'd like to provide all of us?
Well, I guess I just repeat myself as I always do, which is I think we have to continue this conversation. You know, Mark's right. We've got to think about resources differently. And that should really, to model what we're talking about, could be a partnership between the foundation and the nonprofit community where we can, you know, quote unquote, really talk about what the underlying issues are that prevent more collaboration and figure out how we devote more resources. The world's going to force us to do it, so we might as well get ready to do it.
Excellent. Well, thank you. We thank you. And Megan, I'm sure you have a few words you'd like to say. I'm going to transition back over to you.
Thank you, Hans, for that insightful presentation. Now I'd like to.
And the beauty of a partnership is it's a complete paradigm shift. You've gone the whole 360 degrees the other way, and you're not there begging. You're there offering resources. You're offering benefits. You're offering to be able to bring together. I know Sobelco had, last week we did what we called a drive-by, and we dropped off food in the parking lot and then distributed that amongst several organizations. So our staff got a chance to feel like they were contributing to something bigger than ourselves, helping others who needed that, maybe get out of the house, depending on where you live, from Livingston for 20 minutes or for whatever to make that ride. But we had great participation. And again, it gives you a chance, as we say, as Simon Sinek tells us, it feels good to do good for those who are doing good as well. So it's nice to be able to not just say, okay, everybody, this isn't a good time because you're all in isolation, we can't get out. The we can't is the key stumbling block. Instead of saying we can't do that, you say, how can we do it given our circumstance? I think that's been a hallmark really of the nonprofit community throughout this entire pandemic. Wendy, are there more?
I think at this point, we're gonna head back to Megan. Do you have any final words, Sally, before we go back to Megan?
I think they've said it all. And I'm appreciative again for the honest, fair, and valuable insights that everyone has shared this morning. Our panel has been picture perfect. Thank you all.
Great. And thank you, Sally, for moderating. And it was wonderful to hear from all of the panelists. So before we conclude, I just want to remind everyone to please visit our website. We've held over 100 events since March virtually, and we have many of them recorded on our video library. Of course, we look forward to a time when we can bring everyone back together face to face. We miss the energy of the Chamber's in-person events, but until then, please join us on Zoom, attend our roundtables every month and the mastermind every week so we can connect, share, and learn from each other. So before we conclude, I do want to turn it over to Paul Boudreau to say a few words from PPAC Gladstone Bank. Paul?
You know, when you leave an organization and look for another, you want to find an organization that lines up with your values, and that's exactly what I did by going to PPAC Gladstone Bank. Amazing culture of teamwork, client focus, transparency, respect for individuals. And it's just a fantastic place where people are working together to serve the community and serve our clients. And, you know, we're so proud of the PPP program. We did over 2,400 loans and saved over 50,000 jobs in the New Jersey and New York area in the last 3 months. So that was really an amazing experience. Joe Surzan is on the call with us this morning. One of PPAC's values is support for the community and involvement in the community. A lot of our employees go out in the community and work. We're going to have our 100-year anniversary in 2021 as a bank. We have an amazing trust division, amazing PPAC private group that manages about $8 billion today. And so we can do, I'm pretty convinced that our organization can do anything and everything that you need going forward in the future. And so if there's any opportunity for us to serve you, as I say, Joe and I are a team with Anna Rizzoli, who runs the Morristown branch. And we'd love to work with you. And so great to see you all. And we need to do this more. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. And thank you both for your support of this event. So before we close, I would like to turn it over to Paul Muir to say a few
I want
words.
to thank everybody for attending. I want to thank our keynote speaker, Hans, our panelists, Helen and Tony. Helen, I've gotten to know a lot about and really appreciate her participation in the mastermind group. It's been wonderful. I want to thank the Chamber staff for helping us organize this event and produce it. As Sally said, there's a lot behind the scenes. They did an amazing job. The networking worked out really well, and it was just amazing to work with you. So thank you very much. I want to thank our sponsors for supporting the event. And of course, I want to thank Sally for moderating and Jay for presenting the awards, and also for being amazing and valuable co-chairs to the Not-for-Profit Roundtable. And I want to congratulate all of our winners this morning. Thank you for the amazing work that you do to impact and inspire our community. So our not-for-profit community touches lives in so many varied ways, from basic and urgent needs such as food and shelter to our cultural and community needs such as history and art. Morris County and the surrounding area has an amazing community of not-for-profit organizations and leaders. They all work hard to connect with the community under normal circumstances, but this year especially, they've dug deep, forged through, and delivered under unprecedented challenges. Our not-for-profit roundtable has stayed very active, continuing with our monthly meetings and also adding our weekly mastermind meeting. This weekly meeting demonstrates our theme of this conference. We all gathered and we all collaborated. We shared ideas, we shared solutions, and we shared experiences, and we all remained stronger because of it. So this is just the start. Take the ideas that we shared today, continue to work together to make our not-for-profit community stronger and our impact greater. So thank you for attending, and continue to go out and inspire our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you for your leadership. And thank you all for joining us today. So have a wonderful rest of your afternoon and go out there and make some change. Thank you.